Mr. President.
Senator from Maryland.
Mr. President, before I start my remarks in regards to the 2-year anniversary of the CARES Act, I just want to compliment my colleague from Maryland on his statements in regards to Mr. Putin's aggression in Ukraine. Everything he said I totally concur in. The unity that President Biden's been able to instill not only among our traditional allies but the global community, the strength of our help to the Ukrainian people, the help that we've given in regards to humanitarian relief, the sanctions that were led by the United States, but we now have global support for many of these sanctions, is making a difference. This is clearly a battle between good and evil, and I just really wanted to compliment my colleague from Maryland on his statement, one in which I hope all of us agree, and that we can move forward very quickly on the legislation you referred to that passed the House of Representatives that would make it clear that we will not do business with Russia as normal, that we will revoke the favored nation status, normal trade relations, and we will do what Mr. Zelensky has asked us to do, and that is to make it clear that the Magnitsky sanctions, which are individual sanctions imposed against the perpetrators, Mr. Putin and his enablers in Russia, will be maintained with the reauthorization of the global Magnitsky statute. I hope we'll get to that as early as this week, because I agree with my colleague every day that we delay. In fact, it is helping Mr. Putin. We need to make it clear, enact that statute, one of which, by the way, the Biden administration strongly encourages us to do. Mr. President, I would ask that my comments now be appeared differently in the record.
Without objection.
Mr. President, 2 years ago, the United States federal government declared COVID-19 a national emergency. By then, it was clear that we were experiencing a once-in-a-century pandemic and that preventing the spread of this dangerous virus would require our nation's greatest collective effort since World War II. And here in the United States Congress, we knew that this era-defining challenge would require unprecedented action from the federal government to confront the economic and public health crisis created by COVID-19. The pandemic has waxed and waned in the 2 years since then, so opportunities for American families and small business owners to return to their normal lives have come in fits and starts. But one lesson that has remained true through this ups and downs and has been confirmed by multiple occasions through the pandemic is that the United States federal government can, it must, play a role in solving our nation's long-standing, difficult, and intractable problems. Let us remember those first few weeks of the pandemic. The vast majority of Americans did not know what to make of the Center for Disease Control's January report of a novel virus, the coronavirus, identified abroad. By mid-February, small business owners were already feeling the effects of reduced revenues. And by the end of February, the U.S. economy was rapidly deepening into a recession. There were severe disruptions in domestic and global supply chains, leading to shortages in food and critical personal protective equipment, and the unemployment rate was increasing rapidly. Congress had to act, and act fast. So that's exactly what we did. We passed the CARES Act, a bold, unprecedented, and comprehensive $2.2 trillion COVID relief package that met the scale of the crisis we faced. And we did it without partisan rancor or political infighting. The bill passed the Senate 97-0. It's one of the greatest acts of bipartisanship I've witnessed during my career in politics. The CARES Act provided funding to our public health infrastructure for testing, tracing, and vaccine development. It directed funds to state and local governments that were straining under the cost of the pandemic. It also authorized the Treasury Department to get stimulus payments to American families and increased unemployment payments, because we knew that millions of Americans would be unable to work as we came together to slow the spread of the virus. The bill also provided hundreds of billions of dollars to support our nation's small businesses. I was proud to lead a bipartisan negotiations on the small business provisions of this bill on the Small Business Task Force, which included myself, Senator Jeanne Shaheen, Marco Rubio, and Susan Collins. As we negotiated these provisions, we had several key facts in mind. First, small businesses have low profit margins and carry little in cash reserves, so it could only survive a few weeks of a closure without some form of support. Secondly, eventually Americans unable to work would return to work, and it's much easier and quicker for small businesses to reopen with its existing staff instead of hiring new staff. And third, keep small business in operations would make our eventual recovery come about more quickly and much more robust. So we wanted to keep small businesses afloat. We wanted to keep their employees employed. We wanted to keep our economy moving forward. The Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, which predates the pandemic, had already been approved to provide loans to small businesses harmed by COVID-19. So we knew that small businesses would have access to the long-term capital they needed to adapt their businesses and make other investments. EIDL could meet small businesses' long-term capital needs, but we knew that we had to move quickly to meet the immediate capital needs of these businesses, so we created the EIDL Advanced Grant Program to send $10,000 grants to small businesses that applied for EIDL. We knew how important it was to a recovery to keep employees on payroll, so we created the Paycheck Protection Program to provide small businesses with loans worth up to $10 million to cover the cost of up to 8 weeks of payroll. And we made a promise to borrowers to forgive the loans as long as they use the funds for payroll or other allowable expenses. We created a debt relief program to cover all costs associated with new and existing SBA loans for 6 months. And we invested in the SBA entrepreneurship development programs to hire experts and increase capacity to help small businesses navigate the ups and downs of a pandemic. In total, the CARES Act included more than $375 billion in aid to small businesses. The aid could not have come soon enough. The initial $349 billion in PPP funds were exhausted in less than 2 weeks. SBA approved more than 1.6 million loans in that time. SBA's laudable efforts to deliver relief to small businesses also came with disappointments and missed opportunities. Senator Shaheen and I fought to include a provision in the CARES Act that required the SBA to issue guidance to the banks participating in PPP to prioritize loan applications for small businesses in underserved communities. We knew that those small businesses that had priority relations with banks would be first in line, but we wanted the SBA to make sure that those that did not have those privileges would also be able to benefit by the PPP program. We insisted on the inclusion of this provision because we knew that a program like PPP, which relied on financial institutions to make loans, run the risk of worsening the existing inequities in our private capital market. We simply could not allow small businesses in our most vulnerable communities to fall further behind. SBA failed to issue the guidance, so it was no surprise when organizations representing underserved small businesses sounded the alarm that women, minorities, small businesses in rural communities, and other underbanked borrowers were at risk of being frozen out of the program. The SBA's Inspector General would eventually report that the agency's implementation of PPP did not fully align with the intent of Congress. With funds exhausted after less than 2 weeks, the prior administration requested additional funds for PPP and only PPP, which would have neglected the equally important EIDL program, which had also exhausted its funds by then. It's important to keep in mind that since these programs were designed to work together, funding one without the other would not meet the needs of many small businesses. Once again, members of this chamber worked with our colleagues across the Capitol to create a comprehensive COVID-19 relief package that we all could agree on, which passed the Senate, again, unanimously. The bill provided an additional $370 billion of funds to the SBA COVID-19 relief efforts, with $310 billion for PPP, $10 billion for the EIDL Advanced Grant Program. The bill also provided $50 billion for the EIDL program, which allowed the agency to make more than $350 billion in loans. And similar to the ways in which the CARES Act implemented lessons learned during a prior economic downturn, the second package implemented lessons learned during the first round of PPP. Since the SBA did not issue the guidance as required by the CARES Act, Senate Democrats championed more prescriptive policies to make the PPP fairer and more equitable. I remain proud that we were able to set aside $60 billion of PPP funds to be distributed by credit unions, community development financial institutions, minority depository institutions, community banks, and other small lenders that are better able to get funds to underserved and underbanked communities. We wanted to make sure that those who needed it could get it, and I'm proud that we were able to include that in that legislation. Thanks to the set-aside, approximately 600 new, mostly non-bank lenders participated that did not participate in Phase 1, participated in Phase 2 of the PPP program. We should take great pride in knowing that the set-aside worked. According to the Government Accounting Office report issued in September of last year, banks made the vast majority of PPP loans during Phase 1 of the program. As a result, the program favored larger, small businesses. During Phase 2, however, the agency found that the share of loans to underserved businesses and communities was proportionate to their representation in the overall small business community. We succeeded in the second round. For example, 42% of the loans approved during Phase 1 of PPP went to businesses with between 10 and 499 employees. But those businesses only accounted for 4% of all the businesses in the United States. We know that women-owned and minority-owned small businesses are less likely to have employees at all. And when they do, they have less employees on average. During Phase 2, the share of loans to larger of these businesses with 10 or more employees dropped to 17%. We achieved our objective. And while only 9% of the PPP loans issued during Phase 1 went to businesses located in counties where women-owned businesses accounted for a large share of all businesses, the number doubled, 18%, during Phase 2, which is in line with the share of small businesses nationwide owned by women. Similarly, 36% of Phase 1 loans went to small businesses in high minority counties, and that number increased to 50% in Phase 2. In every example, in underserved communities, minority small businesses, women-owned small businesses, because we targeted the funds to mission lenders, because we were able to get the entrepreneurial services to small businesses that needed the help, we reached the underserved community. I would like to take a moment to highlight the significance of these findings. The fact that women and minorities face historic and pervasive barriers to entrepreneurship is not new, and the primary barrier is their inability to access capital. But the GAO's report confirms through the policies that the capital access gap is bridgeable. We can bridge this gap if we pass the right policies. After the end of Phase 2 of PPP on August 8, Congress negotiated the next round of COVID-19 relief, which was not finalized until December 22nd. Negotiations may have taken much longer than any of us would have liked, but we once again found common ground to pass the Bipartisan Economic Aid Act, providing $900 billion in COVID-19 relief, including an additional $325 billion for small businesses. In this bill, my Democratic colleagues and I secured an additional $30 billion set aside for smaller lenders, in addition to expanding eligibility to additional industries and nonprofits. The Economic Aid Act also provided eligible small businesses with an additional second draw PPP loan worth up to $2 million. The bill created new programs as well. The Shuttered Venue Operators Grant Program was created to provide grants up to $10 million to live venues, independent movie theaters, and other culture institutions that were shuttered as a result of COVID-19. And a new $20 billion targeted EIDL Advance program was created to provide an additional EIDL Advance grants to our nation's most vulnerable small businesses who couldn't afford to take out a loan. They needed grants. I would like to take a moment to speak on why the targeted EIDL Advance program was necessary. Similar to how the Trump administration initially handled the PPP, hindering the program's utility, The administration's implementation of the EIDL Advanced Grant Program also made it less useful to small businesses. The CARES Act directed SBA to provide $10,000 grants to all EIDL applicants, but the Trump administration only provided $1,000 per employee up to 10 employees. The targeted EIDL Advanced Program addressed the problem directly by targeting the program to the most vulnerable communities and providing small businesses in those communities with the remainder of the $10,000 Congress intended them to receive. We corrected the mistake initially made. It remains frustrating to know that our federal response to the pandemic could have helped even more small businesses. So it was welcome relief when President Biden was inaugurated, because I knew that Americans, underserved small businesses, would have a champion administering Phase 3 of PPP, and we in Congress would have a partner committed to ensuring that these programs helped as many small businesses as possible. The administration hit the ground running. In February of 2021, President Biden instituted a 14-day priority period for PPP, during which the SBA only processed applications for small businesses with fewer than 20 employees. The administration also changed the loan calculation formula for small proprietors and eliminated an exclusionary restriction that prevented small business owners with a prior non-felony conviction from obtaining a PPP loan for their businesses. In addition to these administrative actions, President Biden also proposed and Congress enacted the American Rescue Plan. The bold relief package created the Restaurant Revitalization Fund to provide grants to restaurants and bars that lost revenues due to COVID-19, added additional funds to the Shuttered Venue Operators Grant Program, and added additional funds to the Targeted EIDL Advance Program, and provided $350 billion to state and localities, which helped spur new state programs and replenish existing ones like the Relief Act and the Maryland Strong Economic Recovery Initiative in my own home state, and created a new Community Navigator program to get the SBA entrepreneurship development resources in the communities that would benefit them the most. We had the federal programs, then we had navigators to help small businesses get those funds. We provided local funds to state and local governments so they could help small businesses. We really went to do everything we could to help those that needed the help the most. The significance of these actions, the passage of the Bipartisan Economic Aid Act in December, the Biden administration's administrative steps, and the American Rescue Plan cannot be overstated. They helped set our nation on course for the most robust economic recovery in American history. Phase 3 of PPP, January to May 31st, 2021, had the most equitable loan approval shares, according to a report released in January of this year by economists Robert Fairley and Frank Fossen. Fairley and Fossen, both of whom have been following PPP and the pandemic's impact on small businesses closely for the past 2 years, cited the extraordinary increase in loan volume of Prestamós, a CDFI that targets Hispanic-owned small businesses, as an example of the success of the PPP under the Biden administration. These numbers are impressive. During phase 1 of PPP, Prestamós ranked 4,274 among PPP lenders by volume. That was phase 1, where you really had to have an existing relationship if you were going to be able to get a PPP loan. In phase 2, where we did a better job in targeting, they ranked 325th. In phase 3, they were among the top-ranked PPP lenders by volume. They wrote that the 14-day priority period in particular helped to bring the PPP loans to disadvantaged small businesses. Thank you to the Biden administration and Democrats in Congress. The program hasn't always been good for small businesses. It has also supported small community banks. The Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis wrote that small business lending was a key business line for small community banks during the operation of the program, and the program will help smaller banks regain some of the ground they have lost to larger competitors in the small business loan market. The Biden administration's implementation of the Shuttered Venue Operators Grant Program has also been a resounding success. After awarding more than 12,800 initial grants worth more than $11 billion at an average of more than $1 million per institution, the administration also awarded more than 8,700 supplemental grants worth more than $3 billion. I mention all that because we know our shuttered venues would be out of business if it wasn't for the shuttered loan program. It's kept them in business. And the administration successfully provided more than 100,000 restaurants with the Restaurant Revitalization Fund worth more than $28 billion in grants. I've seen firsthand the benefit of these grants as I've traveled to Maryland. On Small Business Friday last year, I did a walking tour down Main Street in Annapolis. Every single restaurant owner I visited shared that they may not have survived without the Restaurant Revitalization Fund grant. All of these restaurants are more than just a place to grab a bite to eat. These are decade-old institutions owned by small business operators, and their closure would have deeply felt by the community. In the coming weeks, Congress must finish the job by replenishing the Restaurant Revitalization Fund. There are still hundreds of thousands of applicants waiting on funds. We have to finish the job for our restaurants, because if there are any lessons learned from the past 2 years, is that when Congress comes together to produce thoughtful policies that address the system issues in our economy, it yields results. After enduring the deepest economic contraction since 1947, the American economy grew at the fastest rate since 1984 with the first year of the Joe Biden's administration. We're back, but we still have pockets that need help. In an ironic twist of history, the lessons we have learned and the experience and capacity that we have built up within the SBA has now prepared us for what we can only be described as an entrepreneurial renaissance underway in our communities. According to the Census Bureau, American registered 4.4 million new businesses in 2020. 4.4 million new businesses, the highest total on record, and a 24% increase over the prior year. Remarkably, the surge is being driven by entrepreneurs in some of the most underserved communities, and our policies help make that a reality. For example, data shows that between February 2020 and August 2021, the number of black business owners increased by 38%. Congress needs to take advantage of the entrepreneurial spirit that is surging throughout our communities by continuing to invest in our entrepreneurs, especially those in underserved communities. We have demonstrated that the historic structural barriers that have inhibited the growth of small businesses in underserved communities are far from insurmountable. Now is not the time to retreat. It is time for us to double down. Implementing lessons learned during the implementation of PPP, we should create a new direct loan program within SBA and further empower small businesses. We must build on the inroads that the SBA has made with underserved communities during the pandemic to get entrepreneurial development, business mentorship, and technical training into communities that would benefit from it the most. And we should continue to work in a bipartisan way to ensure that American small businesses have the tools they need to emerge from the COVID-19 stronger than ever. Bottom line is, our policies made a difference. We saved America's small businesses. We need to continue to work in the future to make sure the climate for small businesses is healthy so that our economy can continue to grow. We know that small businesses are the growth engine of job growth in America. We know that they are where most innovation takes place in our economy. Our policies during this pandemic helped save small businesses and now expand the opportunity for small businesses. But we need to continue to pay attention to these issues. I hope we can do this in a bipartisan way. We need to replenish the funds for those that have not been able to get it under the Restaurant Revitalization Fund, and we need to pay attention to small businesses in this country. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.